Disclaimer, this is episode 6 of Something Different by Bisserin. Although in the episode, because we were doing it live, we got confused and we said this is episode 5. So worry not, you're on the right link, this is episode 6. Enjoy! Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to episode 5, Bean's Fact Sheets. So a couple of episodes ago, Edward and I, we had a little conversations regarding how we can learn more about ourselves, not just through philosophy, spiritual, but also through literature. And I was a little bit apprehensive about it, but I've changed my mind pretty quickly, I'd rather say. And today we have a special guest. Edward, would you like to do the introductions, please?
Absolutely. So today we have a very special guest, Michael Flavin. He is a reader in global education at King's College London, novelist, award-winning short story writer. Is there anything I've left out there, Michael?
No, that's fairly comprehensive.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Superb. And so we're going to talk about why narrative is important, why literature is important, how we can find meaning in life, not only through spiritual endeavors, but through the arts, including literature.
Michael.
On literature and
meaning.
Literature and meaning. Okay. Part of it is about keeping the story alive. So one of the areas I write about is Ireland, with a focus on the conflict in Northern Ireland that ran from 1968 to 1998. And there's a slight risk, I think, of a reductive narrative being there now, that somehow everyone was just tired of fighting, so they sat around a table and came to some sort of agreement. One, I think it's not a closed issue like that. It's a peace process, and I'd emphasize process there. We really haven't come to a full stop. We may not do so. But I think with the election of a left-wing president in the Republic of Ireland, I think the presence of a strong Sinn Féin on both sides of the border, this is very much a living issue. So I think part of what writing does is keep the narrative alive through historical fiction, through other media. And yes, it's contentious, because once you're in fiction, you can write in polemical ways that academic writing doesn't allow. But for me, again, that's a strength. And if you get through that, counter narratives and dialectic, for me, that's all to the good. But I think, some important human stories fall by the wayside and no longer have any currency. And part of what writing can do is ensure we keep these narratives alive and that we don't forget.
So your first novel, is it right? One Small Step is your first.
That was, yeah.
Novel. It was brought out a couple of years ago, and it really speaks to what you're saying. It's the human narrative around part of this historical event, so historical fiction, and I think it's really interesting because your background is that you're from Birmingham, and around about that time. So can you speak more about, because you had this child protagonist in the novel, which you've spoken about in previous interviews, but I think, what does that give us when it comes to talking about the narrative of the time that maybe an adult protagonist wouldn't?
I think it's very interesting because you've got, on one level, the cliche is childhood and innocence, but I think it's probably childhood. It's just that capacity to see things in non-conventional ways. So one of the things that Danny does in that novel, he can't figure out why people get so stressed about flags, about what flag is flown where. And I think, if anything, that's a topic that's proved itself to have rather a strong currency, arguably even a toxic currency in the current political climate in the United Kingdom.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a child narrative facilitates a less encumbered perspective. When I was writing it, one of the obvious text to take influence from, I suppose, might have been To Kill a Mockingbird with Scout Finch as our police protagonist. Wasn't mine, really. I'd read a book called In the Country of Men by Hisham Matar, who was a Libyan novelist who had grown up in Gaddafi's Libya. And he writes a book in which his father is kind of a low-level political dissident who gets taken in by the Libyan secret police and rather badly treated. But it's that sense of being a child. There are things that you just, one of the things about childhood is this perpetual low level of confusion. So in the narrator in The Country of Men, his mother is managing to get alcohol, even though it's nominally prohibited. And he's trying to, when she's behaving curiously, he's trying to decode it, and it's tricky. I think in One Small Step, I mean, Danny's mother is clearly promiscuous. There are other men. She ends up leaving the family home for a past lover. And Danny's it's just that that constant low level of confusion and trying to decode it. What does it mean? My mother and this man are upstairs. It's silent. You don't know. Danny doesn't know the facts of life yet. So he's trying to use his existing epistemological apparatus to try and decode what's happened. But we know, the point is, we're doing the decoding for him as adult readers of the text.
Interesting, because Gaddafi came in the last podcast as well, didn't it? Through the means of Berlusconi, but this
they're on the same page.
Yeah. The first, when we're born, after eating and doing everything we have to do, learn about our environment, first thing that kids ask their parents is, tell me a story. And it has been my belief, my internal belief, that we learn about ourselves through other people's stories. Do you think that's the case, Michael?
Yes, I do. I mean, one thing about being from an Irish family, it's quite a strong literary tradition. You don't want for stories if you grow up in an Irish household. And I think this does align with One Small Step. I think it was strange. My parents had both gone through the national school system in Ireland, which basically chucked you out at 14. Yeah. Unless there was money, there was no education beyond that. And my parents were just poor people from a rural part of Ireland. But I always knew, I didn't get to know my mother especially well, but the one thing, she read a lot. I don't think my father ever read a book in his life, but, I think my mother did. And it was one of those things that she definitely gave to me from a young age. And I think right from the beginning, I mean, so many of our fairy tales are either conventional morality tales or engage with really rather weird and troubling things, I think. And if we see how many, the structure of a lot of folk tales, how they replicate from one society to another, sometimes I think they intimate at that febrile, chaotic world beyond the civilized daily world. So I think, yes, there's a didactic quality to fiction we get as a children about behave good and you get a nice piece of pie at the end, behave badly and you don't. But I think there's these introductions to this other world that, Red Riding Hood is a deeply disturbing text. We could go on with other examples of the same thing. So I think they may be just giving us that almost Blakean intimation of, we're in the world of innocence, but it implies the world of experience.
Yeah. And that's probably the reason why the Decameron of Boccaccio and Geoffrey Chaucer, have been more popular than the great treatises of the Latins, isn't it? Yeah. Because we see ourselves, they're like mirrors for us. Yeah. So we see ourselves in these, in novels. Yeah. And it cannot be otherwise. And we see ourselves also in theater. Yeah. There is a novel, historical novel called The Betrothed by Alessandro Manzoni. Not well known abroad, but it's a staple novel that you must read about 10 times in schools. I don't like it. I find it very bland, a little bit like a Christmas novel that you find in books for the time. But it opens up a window on the 17th century Italy. And it tells a lot also about a poet that was in touch with the historical period during Napoleon's, when he went down Italy. He does an introduction, is a little poetry, and I find that poetry way better than the 1,500 pages novel. But my question to you, Michael, is when I see something I don't like in a story, is it probably a part of me that I have to work myself on?
I think it perhaps is. I mean, I've reached the stage where I used to just be stoic, and if I was reading a book and I wasn't liking it, to hell with the content. I was going to get to that final page no matter what. I think I've become a lot more, what the hell was that about? And I can't do it. So I can think of books I've abandoned that just became too uncomfortable for me. And I think it's an odd thing. You think as you grow, you get more resilience. I think if I grow, I've probably got more obvious vulnerability, actually. And there are, I think sometimes literature and the arts generally can be a very good way of conveying us through things we'd rather avoid. But you have to measure that, I think. Made me think when you were saying earlier about why is Chaucer more popular than a lot of more erudite texts. I mean, Chaucer's very scatological. People have body parts, and those body parts are not aesthetically attractive. If you read Joyce's Ulysses, as everyone should several times in their life, we go to the toilet with Leopold Bloom as he defecates. And I think, again, literature, like comedy, can be good ways of actually exposing us to this world that an entire civilization is constructed to repress and deny.
Yeah, I think poetry and comedy have that in common. Poetry and comedy have it in common that they're not necessarily so obsessed with the didactic nature and also the kind of narrative nature of telling you what's going on. And they're more in tune with, they're almost automatic writing. They read like it. They're not necessarily made like it, but it's like they are the artist's soul being put on the page rather than his mind. If you kind of get what I mean. And I think the best literature also has that. And I think for me, because I know what you mean about you, I used to just struggle through a book no matter what, and just kind of, and think it was me that didn't kind of connect with it. But now I'm kind of really thinking, what the hell was that also? But I think I have an idea of where that comes from, and I just want to know if you agree or completely disagree with it. Is it complete nonsense? But I think when the author doesn't connect with that absolute thread of humanity within them, that thread of absolute reality in their writing, that's where you kind of step back from it and you go, what was that actually about? Even though it has a clear narrative structure, it's definitely about something. The man went to the shop and he bought the paper and he went home. But I don't care. What do you think? Would that be a fair statement?
These days, that's the main reason I abandon books, is when I come to the view, I don't care about these characters. I don't care what happens to them. I remember having a meeting once at a literary agency in Carnaby Street, and I'd got the tube over to this meeting. They'd got in touch with me on the basis of something I'd sent them. And it was, 90% of me was on the tube thinking, look, they just want to chat. It probably doesn't matter. It's nothing. The problem was the other 10% of my brain that was already writing my acceptance speech for the Booker Prize. But I did work up on a text with them. And in the end, one of the main reasons they said, we don't see a market for this is precisely because, are these characters we really care about, was the question that was put to me. And in retrospect, I suspect they were right. I think, characters we care about, that's hugely important. It's people we root for. And sometimes the anti-heroes we root for. So, I think King Lear is this extraordinary, accomplishment of the tragedy genre. But I would argue the most attractive character in it is Edmund, the bastard prince, who's the villain, who gets the first soliloquy in the play. And he's basically saying, why am I discriminated against just because I was born out of wedlock, something I couldn't control anyway? And he concludes the soliloquy with, now you gods stand up for bastards. And you probably think, good on you, son. It's that the underdog mentality. So, and I think when we don't have that connection, when we don't identify, I'd cite one exception to that. One of the many things I got wrong. I remember lecturing on a module where one of the set texts was Henry James' Portrait of a Lady. And I'd remembered it was on the syllabus when I was an undergraduate, but I'd just given up after about 100 pages because the pace is so funereally slow. I absolutely think it's totally brilliant now. Because I think that I was that much younger, I was waiting, where's the action? Where does something happen? But in fact, the control is part of it. And I think it's an extraordinarily strong text. You can be, some things are worth revisiting. And I think if you encounter something at point A in life, it resonates with you. If you'd encountered it 5 years either side of that it may have slipped you completely. So I think sometimes it's just that weird conjunction of the time, the place, the text if I think about books that meant the most to me, in retrospect, context is a notable determinant in why the bells chimed at that particular time.
Yeah.
I find that publishers are to writers like galleries are to visual artists.
Roughly,
Should be.
Yeah.
Should be. I've read an awful lot of modern fiction, and recently that I have felt that publisher hasn't done their job very well. Not necessarily the author hasn't done their job very well, but I think like a gallery owner should select the. I just sometimes feel, why has that been selected? I feel like it should be, they're the gatekeepers, right? They're the gatekeepers of this art. But now it's so financial that it's actually not being done.
Yeah, I'm scared because we talked about it the other time that everything is being monetized, isn't it? So if it doesn't make money, you might as well just not do it.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be, but it is often one of the main criteria. Is this book gonna make money?
Yeah.
Are you able to do more of this? I'm really scared that publishers, but also, I mean, it's happened in visual arts that a gallerist goes to an artist, even if he's atelier trained, traditional like myself, and the gallerist say there's no point you making this art because it doesn't make money. So it's very easy to go down the route as a man or a woman to say, okay, now I need to make art to please the others to make money, and then your art has tension in it. You struggle. So. And what are we seeing in a publishing house? What are we seeing in Waterstones? As soon as you come out, you enter, 90% of the books are junk, aren't they? So the publishers, yes, are responsible for the literature landscape of today's time. As much as they want to say no, they are. As artists, we are too. They're all responsible for the decline in liberal arts. Well, Michael, what do you think?
Okay. First, I work in higher education in the United Kingdom. Okay. So, and I think there's no point in ignoring realities you happen to find unpleasant. And I think I'm program director for a couple of master's degrees at King's, and you are set targets for how many students to recruit. And within that target, you are set a target of how many are to be international students because they pay more fees.
Yeah.
So look, that's just how it is.
Yeah.
And I would think, I mean, all it told, I've had 7 books published, 5 non-fiction, 2 novels. And yeah, I have had some what would euphemistically get called difficult conversations, with publishers about that fact. I would just make a point, though. I mean, we mentioned King Lear before. Shakespeare worked within a commercial nexus. Charles Dickens worked within commerce. I think we can't just say that commerce is axiomatically a bad thing. It's just a reality that as people who produce creative work, we have to coexist with it. And it's extraordinarily frustrating when you create something that clearly has strong intrinsic merit, but if it doesn't have that commercial bandwidth or appeal, you're going to find it that more difficult to convey it to an audience.
Although that's the responsibility of the publisher to educate the audience.
You can look at completely, take away the commercial. And if we look at state controlled art that was perhaps produced in some of the Soviet Union and satellite states, that wasn't the answer either, I think, because then the state can control what gets produced. Now you can argue that in a commercial context that happens indirectly anyway. If you look at network television in the United States, I mean, post the last presidential election, I've had very, very scant. That's one of the things that, again, I really find quite difficult to face up to is the magnitude of what happens. But if you look at what Fox News broadcasts, now to me, it just strikes me as a non-stop outflow of obscenity.
Yeah.
But there is the audience for that. So I think, again, there isn't state control in the Soviet sense there, but there's extraordinary stranglehold on what actually can reach a mass audience. I think on a much smaller scale and a less genuinely sinister and worrying scale, that does happen in creative art, absolutely, and it's ongoing.
I'm scared because, I mean, we sell capitalism as if it gives freedom to everyone, but artists sometimes have to push to make their own way. Because look at Mikhail Bulgakov, yeah? Mikhail Bulgakov, if he wasn't stubborn as he was, he would have never been able to publish The Master and Margarita.
Your favorite book?
Yeah. Because, he desperately wanted to go abroad. And, the head of state said, no, you have to stay in the country. Eventually, he had to make concession, and he allowed him to be the head of, all the theaters in the Soviet Union. But artists, where they feel, I think they have to push. They have to find all the means, even if it's economically not viable.
So maybe it's not so much about bemoaning the limitations and the things we must strive against, but being aware of them and striving against them anyway.
That's it.
But awareness is the first step, right? So this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to just kind of bring this awareness of the control. There's an interesting thing happening in Ireland at the moment, which is this, I don't know if you've heard of it, this artist's wage.
No.
Where as any sort of artist, you can apply for this artist's wage, and you get an amount of money that should be enough to keep you going. I think I say reasonable. I think it's €350 a week or something, but it's something so that they can say, okay, well, I can still be an artist without the state control necessarily. Now, I don't know how they're selected, so that's another thing. But yeah, I think
that sounds completely great. And as as somebody who is Irish ethnically, I'm on the first plane, obviously, because that sounds great. But I think one of the things that how can Ireland afford some of these things? I mean, Ireland has a sovereign wealth fund. Now, most of the countries in the world that have sovereign wealth funds have got massive oil revenue. We can safely say that Ireland doesn't have that. But if we argue, well, how has Ireland managed to produce a sovereign wealth fund? It has ludicrously low levels of corporation tax that undercut all the other countries' levels of corporation tax. So Apple and others have their European headquarters there. So even there, you've made a fundamental compromise by giving these big behemoths preferential tax rates. But in aggregate, then, it generates revenue you can go out and do good things with. I think, like it or not, as people who produce creatively, I think the fact that it may be a difficult reality doesn't mean it's one we should shun. I think it is a fact we have to work with that. And although I've said I've had some difficult conversations with publishers, I've had some really good relations with publishers too. Certainly with One Small Step, that was the case. And then you get from that, and I mean, it says something for the other 6 books, I suppose, but that with that book that I wrote, people I have never met and will never meet got in touch with me to say, I grew up in Britain during the Troubles, and it was like that. And I've had, contact from people in Australia who've emigrated over there, or the United States. I've never had the impact and reach. And just you saying about how we connect with people, that's people you have never met and will never meet,
and that's it.
who went out their way to get in touch with you, to say, I read that book and it really spoke to me. And the one and only time in my life where it was an event where someone said to me, did you write One Small Step? And I thought, I just want to preserve this moment, because that's it. It's never going to get any better. So, and that was a woman. She'd come over here in the 80s working for Aer Lingus and had, met a British lad and settled down and had kids. But she knew what it was like to be Irish in Britain when bombs were going off, and you're getting it at work next day, or you're getting it at school the next day.
But that's true success, isn't it? That is why you do it, to connect with these people. I know it would be lovely to have a Booker Prize or millions of pounds as well, but surely there's this huge disconnect, because you've spoken to another human through magic of words, and you've touched them.
True. I mean, with One Small Step, I'd never written autobiographically before. And so that, I have to say, as someone, as a compositional experience, it was actually a lot easier than the other books I'd written. Because I'd written academic books, and with that, you're constantly having to go back and check to make sure you got something right. You're constantly having to triangulate your evidence. You're trying to build an argument whilst not falling into the bear traps of you didn't produce the evidence. That's only a secondary source. But that sense of being unfettered when I wrote it, and actually in part telling my story, was, I wasn't that. At the time, it was just oddly immersive. And as I said, I'm not a first-person writer. I'm not a confessional writer. But suddenly to be doing that felt really, it was odd. It was a surprisingly easy book to write.
Can I ask if you felt a touch of what Mihai Csikszentmihalyi talked about? With
Flow.
editing? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I read that book. I mean, I thought in the end I found all the analysis really strong, but then at the end when it comes to the recommendation, I found that a slightly pedestrian.
It's tricky, yeah.
Find something you like doing and do that. I thought, well, that's a lot of pages I've waded through to come to that bit. But absolutely, flow state. A person I worked with at King's, she's gone now, was Deborah Bull, who was a dancer for the Royal Ballet.
Yeah.
And she'd done that for years. And she spoke about when she was dancing on the stage. I mean, I know nothing about ballet, but that's what it was like. You do all the technical training and you move here at this point and you do this maneuver, but then in the enacting of it, and she, I said, well, is it some kind of state of altered consciousness? She said, it's actually like a higher consciousness.
Yeah.
So,
Did you feel it, do you think, writing, because you've done all the work, you've done all the practice, you've written all the stories, you've done the academic work. Did you feel then when you got to finally writing your story in inverted commas, did you find that you touched that?
You tell you what, an oddity that, again, I've never had in any other book. There were bits of it. I've never read the whole thing all the way through, but I've occasionally picked up, particularly if I'm feeling down, I just keep all my 7 books at the same point in the bookshelf. And interesting what you're saying about Buddhism. A student of mine who was Buddhist gave me a key ring with a pouch on it, which has some soil from some famous Buddhist temple. I'm sorry, I don't know which one, but I keep that with that book as well. And occasionally just touch it as ritual thing to keep yourself going. But occasionally I've opened a page of One Small Step. I have no recollection of writing this. Yeah. And that's the oddest feeling, because as an academic, you have to be meticulously conscious of what you've produced. Yeah. But genuinely, there are passages in One Small Step that I have no, because I'm reading them, thinking, it's all right, this. And I'm normally a stern critic of my own work. Yeah. But you're sort of looking at it and I think, oh, neat touch with phrasing there, young man, and things like that. So it's very odd. One Small Step. There were bits of it I don't remember writing.
We did touch just before you came in. We did touch upon how flow state. How when you learn an art, you do learn the basics. You do learn the grammar. Like in visual arts, you have to. The grammar of visual arts are drawing, life drawing, learning color. So you do have to learn the grammar before you can speak. And we touched upon learn the rules, learn the grammar, to then forget about it. So in this way, you can enter the flow state, a place where if you're writing, but you're not worrying about, am I doing it wrong? Am I doing it right? So you don't have your mental frameworks that you learned judging your work. Because with creativity comes the perceived bad and the perceived good. Like you made the metaphor the other day. It's like yeast. Like when you're doing bread, it comes with it. You need to allow the bad, when you're writing, you need to allow the bad to come out in order for the good to come out. Both of them had to work. And what I'm really worried about how higher education, today's higher education, is kids come in, they get indoctrinated. They learn, they know very well. And they come out, I know how things should be. When I write, I know what's good and what's bad. That hampers creativity and does hamper also evolution in arts and in the literature process, I think. What do you think, Michael?
Well, first, as far as students go, I have a lot of sympathy for them, if sympathy is not too condescending a term. I mean, I remember going as someone from a single parent, family. My father was a bus driver, and he was signing on by the time I went to university. He'd left his job before the mandatory point. And so the state backed me. I don't know why. God bless them. They did. There's 3 years of funding from, my local education authority, a grant to help me live, though I also worked part-time through my degree. And they backed me. And like they had it with the National Health Service when I was an asthmatic child and needing inhalers, I never had to pay for any of those things. And I would actually argue, if you're looking at the cost benefit argument and return on investment, I really haven't done the state too bad then. because, going on to get what I got in education and do what I do for a living. I mean, I contribute and do not resent contributing to the health and education systems that produced me there in the first place. But if you look at it now, I mean, I think it would be very hard for someone like me to do now what I was able to do then. Because it would be like saying, I'm going to do this for 3 years, and if I live incredibly frugally, I'll have £50,000 worth of debt. And that's real, if I just have the most rudimentary roof over my head and a really rudimentary diet. Wow, that's quite an entrepreneurial commitment. Yeah. And particularly in my field, I mean, I did my first degree in English Lit. In truth and honest, where's that going to put you at 21 now, a BA in English? I mean, you see what I mean? If you are looking for that, I've got to do something. There's an academic. Now, he comes from a very strong Marxist tradition. His name's Terry Eagleton. And he was lecturing in his 20s. I think he's still knocking about somewhere. But remember him saying that university used to be a thing that people went to find out about themselves and what they wanted and what they could do. But he noticed the sea change in the 1980s, that suddenly students were coming in saying, look, I've got to get this 3 years out the way with, because I've got to get out there and start earning. Now, as I said, he comes from a very quite pure Marxist tradition. So obviously he has his own ideological axe to grind. He has a point. And I think, okay, again, that's a reality that we could talk about, but it's not always comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, it's not comfortable, but where it's not comfortable, where it pains, that's where the work starts. As soon as it pains, as soon as there's pain in talking about it, that's where the real work starts. It's not just in Buddhism, it's also it's in everything. We touched upon this with Gavin, and also in our previous episode. When you're choosing a course, can it ever be a true choice if it's conditioned by the worry of the money you're going to make? This is a very bourgeois mentality that starts in the 80s, actually, maybe a bit sooner in the 70s. And in Italy, it's just everywhere. And it starts from school. And I do remember the teacher telling me, if you do not get good grades, you will go work in the fields. And where is the problem with that? I ask, where is the problem with that? When did we start this sick way of thinking?
It's a big Irish thing as well. I think I wonder if it's from being a country of immigrants and emigrants, always moving around. But it's a huge thing, and it has been since at least the 90s, that you must have a good job. That's it. That's the important thing. That's all you need to do, because your life will figure itself out if you have a good job. Have a good job, make some money, and that's it. That's all you need to do. And I kind of think it cheapens life somehow. And I think education is doing that also. And what you say is right. Doing a BA in English literature, what is it going to get me, right? So I did my first degree in optometry, became an optometrist. Very Irish, you do the thing, and you become the thing. Great, fantastic. I did my second degree in English literature, as Michael knows, because he was one of my tutors. And I think I learned more about life and myself doing that second degree than I learned through the whole rest of my life, including now, because I learned about, vaguely, philosophy, art, literature, how to write, how to express myself. I remember, and this is not blowing smoke, and this was not necessarily planned, but I remember one tutorial I had with you, Michael, right? And it's actually my favorite tutorial I had, and probably the favorite class I had throughout my whole degree, because I don't know if you remember, we came up with the idea of the full English.
Oh, the TV show, yeah. We should have run with that, man. We'd have a lot of money. I mean, if we're talking about commerce.
So we just sat in this room, and it was like, I don't know, what, there 10 of us, 10 students or something. And Michael just kind of said, I don't even know what the tutorial was about, but we were coming up with ideas about something. And we just all of us just bounced off each other and came up with this amazing idea of a chat show, morning TV, and we just ran, and it was creative genius in that room at that time. That was flow, and that's what education needs to be, to teach you how to forget about thinking, to forget. And there was a couple of students there who were maybe sitting back and felt a little bit shy and ashamed, maybe, this is a bit silly. But the ones of us who actually did it, that was exceptional. And honestly, if the money I paid, because I paid for my second degree, the government paid for my first one in Ireland. I paid out of my own pocket for my second one, no loans, no nothing. Every penny was worth it for that experience. So if we could give students that experience during their university degree, whether they're medicine, yes, that brings me on to one other thing before, sorry, I'm going on a bit, but whether they're in medicine or the arts or whatever, and there was a paper you were involved in, but I don't know if you wrote it, and it was about healthcare, healthcare degrees, and what was it? Teaching them. Was it arts? It was liberal arts in healthcare setting.
Oh, yeah, that rings a bell. Yeah, I've done that. Yeah, that's one of the things.
A while ago.
Yes, yeah. No, I know what you mean. I did that. Yeah,
but I think doing that because you didn't. Obviously, it was a meta-analysis of different studies that were done. But it was just interesting to me because I think, yes, you should be teaching doctors how to be creative and how to know who they are and how to feel and how to be emotional and empathetic, because that's their job. And there was an optometric link in that as well, because there was one, it was the same thing, but it was teaching optometrists this. I think I've never been better at my job since I did the literature degree. I since I did that literature degree, I think I have become a better optometrist, which is really weird, but there we are.
The thing I've done with students is to start a class by putting this big slide on the screen of one of Mark Rothko's Seagram murals, which were produced for the Four Seasons restaurant in the Seagram Liquor Building in America in the post-war period. And at the time, it was the world's most expensive real estate, New York. So this big liquor company, Seagram, bought it. And the idea was there'd be a top floor restaurant where all the top people in New York would go. It was called the Four Seasons restaurant. John F. Kennedy would eat there. And they paid Mark Rothko $30,000 to do a series of murals to go around the wall of the restaurant. And he's conscious, he stated it at the time, I want to make those rich bastards feel sick. So he deliberately, they're incredibly powerful, the Seagram murals. And I've often put a slide of one of those up on the screen, told students the context in which it's produced, and just said, what do you see? And you just get these, I remember someone saying to me, it looks like a razor blade in a bowl of blood. Now, I was quite scared of that student after that. But but nonetheless, I think everyone's got that in them, that creative potential. And what ideally you can do with an education is catalyze it. Now, I tell students, look, you're not here as kind of the recipients of what I tell you. We're here to co-construct knowledge. And that's challenging when they've gone through a school system that is the antithesis to that and is precisely if we look at in the UK, this is very back office and dull. But when the Education Act of 1870 was passed under Gladstone's government of 68 to 74, if you look, it was basically to send people out at 13 to work in an industrial economy. So you were told when to turn up, you were told when to leave, you sat in lines, and if you transgressed, you were battered. And then you were sent out at 13 into a factory where you're told when to arrive, you're told when to leave, you do what you're told, and if you step out of line, you know about it. So we can see the kind of the ideology of school. But if you look at the architecture of a schoolroom, it's not radically different to 1870. Power tends to get vested at the top of the room in where the teacher stands by whatever medium board or whatever is expressed. Sitting in lines is still absolute. So I think it's there. There's one other thing about the Irishness of get a job that you mentioned. No, really ran home with me. So this Seamus Heaney said this when he'd go back to Derry. He'd go into the pub, and of course, it's Ireland, so there's the old boys sitting there with their daytime pints, and they knew him by sight. And the line would be, "You still doing that poetry then?" Which he always said had the subtext of, "You not got a proper job yet?" And I think, that's very Ireland.
It is. It's very Irish, very practical to a fault.
Well, it's hard to get out from that mentality, from that mindset, because we tell the next generation, and we've been told from the previous generation how we should live, right? So they say, if you study this, if you get this job, if you write like this, if you go to uni, you'll be happy. What does it mean to be happy? I've been asking this in every episode of the podcast. So we try to impose meaning in our life. the truth of life is that it's that and higher state of consciousness is that they have no meaning. The whole meaning is that there is no meaning. That's the greatest gift we could ever get in this life, that we do not have a meaning. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to have so many experiences in our life. Then what happens? Kids go to school, and then eventually they are faced with a reality that doesn't meet what they have learned. And that's where depression kicks in. So when we are educating the kids, and I put myself into that generation, born in 1993, where we have been educated to a reality that doesn't exist. So what does happen? It happens once you get into work. It happens that, and you've been through the educational system, whatever kind of studies you've done, you get to a point where, oh, okay, I've done this, I've done that. I should be happy, right? I've learned, I know literature. I know, why am I not successful yet? I know literature. Why the publisher doesn't understand me?
Yeah.
I go around, I impose my ego. I'm not famous yet. Why is that?
Yeah.
And so we are preparing them for sadness, because they are educated to a real that doesn't exist, and that happens. I'm going a little bit off, but I brought this to a lot of people when we meet professionally, when we meet in relationships, for future relationships, in love. Will we ever recognize the person we are with for what they really are? So when you meet a woman, when you meet a man, will you really recognize them as the love of your life? My answer is most likely not, because your mind is full of garbage. Because it's like, oh no, she should be 6 foot high. She's not learning literature, and that will happen in literature. When you read a good book, if you do not keep your mindful, if you're not mindful, you will not recognize a good piece of art, because you will not be able to recognize a good piece of literature or visual art, because your mind is full of garbage. Is not able to come out of those schemes. So a good publisher will not be able to recognize a book with merit, like we talked earlier, because in his mind, all he knows is publishing. And what should be good based on publishing? Do you see the filter? Where is the free will in that? There isn't, because your mind is conditioned in that. And all the higher education should do is to give you the tools to recognize that.
I have a question. This might be, this is good. I might be right up your alley, actually. I will be, because I've researched. Michael. So the question is a bit broad, and we can narrow it if we need to, but does technology have a role in this, in helping the students of the future to kind of to navigate this, or will it make it worse?
The incendiary issue in higher education in the UK at the moment that gets everyone's blood boiling is AI, and the extent to which, I mean, it takes cheating to a whole new level. I mean, by definition, it's undetectable. So at the moment, we have, I mean, the master's degrees I teach on, a third of them is the dissertation. But you can go on ChatGPT or a similar platform and just say, well, I want it to be 14,000 words long. I want it to include these scholars. It can do that for you, and it's a minute's work. I mean, we're looking at going back to having drivers for every student who submits a dissertation, in part as an act of, when we're told, well, it can't be a detective exercise. In practice, I think it's hard to see how it's anything other than. When I first tried ChatGPT, I was put onto very early by a former student of mine who's now he's now in San Francisco. He came from a fascinating character. His mom and dad had come here as Kurdish immigrants in the early 1990s as asylum seekers. He'd grown up on a rough estate, got into King's College London. I mean, he's now got an AI startup in San Francisco, having raised $4 million of finance. I mean, he's quite an extraordinary character. So he put me onto it very early, and I went on it, and I thought, this doesn't work. Because basically I'd put in a question, and it was so the structure was so, on the one hand, but on the other hand. And I thought, look, any student hands in this to me, I'm going to spot it a mile off. It's not going to work. The next time I looked at it was about a year later, bang. Because, of course, it's learning all the time from everything that's put into it. And what really scares me a little, one of the short stories that I had published, fed that into ChatGPT and said, write me an analysis of that. And it is sensitive to literary nuance. It was writing intelligently about metaphor and symbolism. And I was thinking, look, okay, I wouldn't set my work for students because I don't think that's ethical. But if a student were to hand this in, it was right at the top edge of upper second. Yeah. Really close to a first. And it was only that sense of perhaps personal evaluation of the text that it hadn't quite got, but it's on the way there. Yeah. But genuinely, you're talking about within seconds, it's giving me at the high end of 2-1 level of literary analysis, and how something that doesn't feel can pick up on symbolism and nuance and metaphor, and not simply identify this as a metaphor, but explicate what the metaphor is achieving in the text. Yeah. That really is a whole different level of artificial intelligence accomplishment, and it's going to be quotidian. It's going to be something that makes a lot of what we've done obsolete. So yes, I think in higher education at the moment, the hottest of hot potatoes, if I can use a slightly Irish metaphor, is artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I'm very happy that they're bringing back Vivers, because it forces you to think on the moment. It forces you to think.
I didn't think they didn't do them anymore, actually.
Yeah.
I didn't know that they were gone.
I mean, if you think about that, I mean, one, again, a very utilitarian consideration here. I mean, in the department I teach in, we have 2 master's degrees. We have approaching 50 students. If you're going to get a Viva, you need more than one person in the room. You see what I mean? It actually, it's actually about the volume of work. And one thing about working in HE these days, you are not underworked. Student to staff ratios have increased. Yeah. That when marking time comes along, I mean, I've just worked a 7-day week. I worked all day Saturday and all day Sunday in marking. Wow. I mean, I have a very good working life. Being an academic is still a relatively nice job to have. Yeah. But the volume of work you produce is considerable now.
Yeah. Maybe though is a technology's role to, as it always has done, to remove so much of what we don't need to do. Isn't that really what, instead of misusing it like we are currently to write our dissertations and short stories and essays, maybe we should be figuring out a way that it can be used to make your working life more in tune with what you should be doing. Not that I say that you don't know what you should be doing, but I think you're so worked that you don't have time to do what you should be doing.
That's 100% true. I mean, I did a PhD at the University of Kent, and a lot of my 4 years was spent on the train from Canterbury into London to go to the British Library to consult an archive. And by the way, I remember the first day I went up, I'd never done anything like this before. And of course, I'm thinking I just hand the slip in with this is what I want to see. And I sat there for the whole day, just getting more and more depressed because it never arrived because it was on a different site. Yeah. So I had to learn from mistake, and the second time order days in advance so it was there. But all that time you spend the A to B, and you turn up to a library, we can't find that one. That just happens. Yeah. Now, I genuinely think that thesis that took me 4 years, you could have written the same thing now in about 18 months. Because all the archive material, it's now all digitized. I could show it to you in 5 seconds. Yeah. So for that thing, I'm certainly not a pessimist about technology. And it's, the books, I'm currently writing an academic book. Now I've made one physical research trip when I was up at the National Archive just on Friday for things where there's only one copy and you're there. But the rest of it, and I've colleagues who never go to the library, and why should they when you can access everything at a network terminal? Via King's, I have access to all the databases, all the journals, internationally in seconds. Yeah, we should definitely celebrate what technology enables for us as academics and artists and practitioners. Yeah.
You've been in education for a very long time, right?
Yep.
My question is, do you notice a different predisposition in the previous decades to the current generation as they approach higher education? How the students, are they more prepared? Are they less prepared? How's their predisposition compared to the 80s and 90s?
They are quite scarily focused. I think still, when I went up to be an undergraduate, I definitely had this sense of a degree will get me a good job. So I was never, I think this idea that employability mattered back then, and particularly for me as a working class kid, it mattered that I would get a job from it. but it was quite a meandering. There was just this amorphous thing that I'd get a degree and that would get me a good job. Now, if someone had said to me, what does the good job look like? I didn't really see that as a remotely urgent thing to think about. That will kind of just fall into part of the time. And back then, you were one of only about 12% of the population that was going to university. So you think, well, I'll cherry pick, obviously, because that's what it's like. But I see students come to me now who have this adumbrated, this mapped out, I'm going to do this. And some of them, I mean, you just come away from meetings thinking, how can you be like that at 18, 19? You are so kind of laser focused on this trajectory. I think it is problematic. But I remember talking to a student who wanted to be a human rights lawyer. And at school, they said, well, you need 3 A's to do that at a good university, and we're predicting you AAB. So what she did was look at a degree. I think it was at King's. I think it may have been the English degree or a history degree, somewhere in the humanities, that she'd already seen, or with that she could get into this position, which would enable her to do that qualification, which would take her to the human rights lawyer level. She, having seen that the arterial route, A to B, wasn't going to get her, she'd looked at A to C to D and then back to B. And I just think that sense of having a map, and it didn't, you can talk to a young person, sorry, patronizing comment, klaxon sound here, but that you can say, well, I'm going to do this. And you're thinking, yeah, right, wait till that collides with reality. Yeah. But this was a person who had an utterly plausible narrative and structure for how she was going to get from where she was to where she wants. And I just thought, you're 19 years old. How that, at 19 years old, I knew what pub I was going to that evening, but that was about the limit of my future self.
Yeah. That works for taking the tube, right? That station is closed, so I can go around this way. But I don't think that works for life. I don't think the human visual system, if I metaphorically use it, can actually take in that much, because we can't, because you do this degree and then the next one doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's
or AI has taken that job, or war breaks out. Like, and this is. Yeah, I don't know. I think
that's them. He's literally describing what we were talking about earlier. Yeah. They're being educated to a reality that doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's worse is that the first question that they ask you when you start A level or whatever GC, I'm not really learning English lower system, but the first question the teachers asks are, "What do you want to be when you become adult?"
Yeah. Yeah. I know a person, and I'm going to use no names. It's the daughter of a person I know. And that's as much detail as I'm going to give. But essentially, she's a very talented musician, singer, composer potentially. And I happened to meet this young person, and we spoke about future and stuff like that. And they said, I said, what do you want to do? Where you go from here? Coming up to A levels, that kind of thing. Oh, so something that'll make me money. And I almost wept. I just thought, if I could, and I know I wouldn't listen to myself, but if I could go back to me at that age and ask myself that question and give me that, I would slap my own face. But I know I wouldn't listen, and it's so hard, because what do you say to a young person that says whatever will make me money? Because you don't know what's going to make you money, because I had loads of people in my peer group who were computer programmers who were like, yeah, look at them guys making all that money. Well, I'm not making much money now.
I had a colleague at King's who did a small-scale research project where he spoke to dental students at King's. King's is very big on medicine, dentistry, nursing, a lot of those white lab coat disciplines, okay? And he spoke to a small sample of dentistry students at King's, undergraduates, and just asked them the same questions. I can't even remember what the overarching preoccupation of this research was, and this colleague's long gone. But he said to this one lad, "Why do you want to be a dentist?" To which he replied, utterly po-faced, "It's the quickest way to get a Porsche." Now, that does not mean he will be a bad dentist. He may be a first-class dentist,
of course,
but it was strict. But it was
he
purely
an unhappy human, though.
Oh yeah, but it was extrinsic. If I become a dentist, because I know the program at King's, I happen to know it's 5 years long.
Yeah.
But then you are qualified to be a dentist. Right. It's not like law where you then have to do these supplementary professional qualifications. So your 5 years, yes, that's a big investment. but you're instantly earning the really big bucks, because dentistry is one of those things that's de facto privatized completely through the UK.
Yeah.
He will make a lot of money very quickly, and my sense is he will be driving that Porsche. And I'm sure, I've never driven one. I'm sure it's quite a pleasant experience as far as driving experiences go.
But what then?
Yep.
Yeah. Have you ever got exactly what you want? It's awful.
Yes, it's dreadful. Dreadful business.
Then you go, oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay, that was great for half a second.
Do you know the Philip Larkin poem, The Less Deceived?
No.
It closes on an absolutely fantastic metaphor. It talks about fulfillment's desolate attic.
Okay, oh, nice.
You know, I love the idea of the attic, this space you climb up to and aspire to. And then when you finally get there, it's just empty space.
Yeah.
So I would, your listeners, take a look at Philip Larkin's poem, The Less Deceived, which is based on a sociological work of the mid-19th century by Henry Mayhew. But it's just called The Less Deceived, but it ends on this metaphor of fulfillment's desolate attic, which I remember. I've never had depression. I'm not, I just don't experience it. But the day after I passed my PhD, I had this horrible, I'd spent over 4 years working towards this one goal. And on the day you told you passed, you're euphoric. I think I knocked back a bottle of red wine, which may have been unwise in retrospect, but did all of that stuff. And then you wake up the next day and traffic still stops on red and goes on green. The world is totally unchanged and couldn't care less. Yeah. And I just felt such a deflated sense on that day after, which may have been about the red wine now I think about it. But I know what you mean. I certainly have no problem with Larkin's metaphor and think it's very well observed.
It comes to mind also, I've already brought it up, but just his words just resonate every time in my mind. Oscar Wilde, Oscar Wilde used to say, if you want to become a doctor, if you want to become a policeman, or if you want to become any other profession, you will become that. That will be your punishment.
Yeah.
that would be your punishment. And the true artistic life always changes, and you never know where you actually are. So do not be. My message to the young ones is, do not be afraid of not knowing what you are, because if you know what you are, you're in trouble.
Yeah. Speaking about, that's it. Talking about finishing a long project and feeling unfulfilled, Michael has a new book coming out. So Michael has a new book coming out called Long is the Way. He's finished writing it, I believe, and is gonna go to publishers. But do you see any parallels in what you've written there, or the thematic kind of elements around it, and what we're speaking about?
I think so. I mean, one, it's my second novel, which was called The Voice Hero, was about the relationship between a psychotherapist and his client. And the momentum of the novel was the reversing of polarity. By the end of the book, you're really rather unsure about who's treating who. And that instability is the point of the thing. But my third novel, Long is the Way, is going back to the terrain I was exploring in One Small Step, which is about the Troubles, and particularly about how the Troubles impact on the lives of non-combatants. I think that's of interest. It's got a 13-day, very compressed focus. For those who remember, there was a series of events in early April 1988. 3 members of the IRA were shot dead in the streets of Gibraltar. All of them unarmed. Now, I should stress they were an active service unit. They weren't there to see the sights. But if you send the SAS over, you're probably not looking to effect a rather gentle arrest on people. That's not what the SAS are brought in to do. When they came back to Belfast for burial at Milltown Cemetery, that funeral was attacked by a lone loyalist armed with guns and grenades. And again, a further 3 people were killed there. And then a couple of days later, at one of those funerals, in one of these just awful little vignettes from the Troubles, 2 British Army corporals, by accident, it can only have been by accident, no other, we never know, we don't know why this happened, but no other, just sheer human turn right. You were meant to turn left there, mate, not right. He drives into the funeral cortege. The cortege thinks they're being attacked again and turns on these 2 British Army corporals and kills them both. So within 13 days, and it's domino effect, Gibraltar leads to Milltown, leads to this event at the funeral. And suddenly you're thinking, well, what next? Civil war is you're waking up the next morning and it only takes one spark now to do that. So I write about that compressed period. Of course, there's a couple of things we know now that we didn't know then. And one is, while all this horrible chaos and violence and murder was happening, there were back channel negotiations were starting at the end of the 80s, which fed forward into the peace process of the 90s. So at the time, there's all this appalling tumult and violence on the surface. There's this counter narrative beneath. Another thing we know now that we didn't know then was that the head of the IRA's internal security unit was an informer.
Really?
Yeah, and in fact, informers were. So I'm trying to catch that sense of paranoia as well. Who's listening? Who's watching? Who can you trust?
Yeah.
So it's a very febrile and at times edgy text that navigates through those 13 days. I think because One Small Step, I didn't really realize till after it came out how many people would be touched by it.
Yeah.
But then again, you know, the Irish diaspora is this massive population. Perhaps it's not altogether surprising. And when you consider one of my texts that I used to inform it was about the Libyan political crisis, even if people don't share the exact cultural context, the architecture of that experience. Because I think one of the things is, you'll know, neither of you is English. Being an immigrant is a curious experience in and of itself. And certainly my parents' generation had this, turn up, keep your head down, do your work. I mean, they were politically incredibly conservative people because it was all about deferred gratification and hard work. Yeah. And they would, there'd be these raging anti-Irish jokes on television every night, this thick Irishman, night after night, and they never once stood up, never once protested. And that was fine. That was a conscious choice they made for survival. But I think if you're, yes, if you're Irish, but if you're Indian or Pakistani or Bangladeshi or anything else, you'll know the architecture of that experience, even if the cultural context is different. So I'm hoping with Long is the Way, although it's a bit like One Small Step, it's very culturally specific, but there's an odd universality about this. And I think some great writers, of whom disappointingly I am not one, but have that ability to make texts and creative work both singular and universal simultaneously. It was the great Thomas Hardy accomplishment, I think, and genuinely great writers and artists can do that.
Yeah, but that's really what art is about, isn't it? The universality and the specifics.
The Iliad does it.
Yeah, exactly. It's still relevant now because we still have two legs and two arms. And that's what we are. Yeah, I think that's lovely. Yeah,
lovely. Thank you.
Pretty good.
Thank you, Michael, for today. We're done. I think it's the longest we've ever done so far.
Oh yeah, by 2 minutes.
Now towards the end of every podcast, we have Ed's notebook. Ed's write notes about today's episode. Short notes to which we try to provide answers.
I think we've more or less covered everything.
Oh, heck good.
It's been pretty good. Let's see. With one thing, we didn't speak about the spiritual, so I was going to ask: is there a more spiritual aspect to how fiction can kind of connect us in a? So I wanted to speak a little bit about, and we won't necessarily, but about spirituality and what I think that means and how it can link to literature. So spirituality comes from spiritus, meaning breath or spirit. So spirituality in this context meaning the ideas around what it means to be alive. And I think if we take that as a working definition, I think literature can be highly spiritual without being religious or talking about anything like that. And I wonder if we had time for just one last question in that. A, do you think that could be true? And B, where do you sit spiritually and religiously, if you want to answer it?
No, that's fine. I mean, to deal with the second part first, I'm hopeless. You mentioned about you mentioned earlier about achieving stuff and going out there. I'm dreadful at doing nothing, and the very few people who know me well will tell you I just can't do it. So I get the appeal and the attraction of, say, for example, meditation as a practice. I've tried to do it. I'm terrible because all that's happening is my brain is telling me all the things I should be doing instead of sitting here like a hermit just doing nothing. And I'm just atrocious at it. So maybe I have to come to terms with that at some later stage. But I genuinely have, I would do what I always do about anything. I can read a book on anything and even say, try doing this. I think The Full Catastrophe was one I read that had been recommended to me. It was recommended to me, but I just tried and it just doesn't work. And as I said, I've got students I've got to know pretty well who again do it and strongly recommend it. I've tried, I've failed. Fine. In terms of how art can have spiritual resonance, though, I just mentioned in a previous answer Thomas Hardy, who I always think is, if anyone's kind of listening to this, and partly because I think, well, I'd like to be a novelist, I'd like to get a novel published, and at the Open University, I taught creative writing, and a lot of people had that aspiration. And I think one thing you have to accept is how long the apprenticeship period can be for something like that, and that's often. People tend to see, if you like my student earlier, quite an arterial route between where they are and that, and I think that's very unlikely. But that's a separate point. But if I would tell anyone who wants to know about how to write novels to read The Mayor of Casterbridge, because I think in the opening chapter, the hero Michael Henchard does something monumentally stupid under the influence of cold drink, and he wakes up the next morning with instant repentance and real, woe over it, and he makes a solemn pledge that he won't touch alcohol for 21 years, okay? And he's no fool. He sticks to it. And he works hard and he applies himself and he becomes a force for good in his community and he achieves, civic role of mayor. But even then, it's not for him. He's genuinely beneficent and takes a servant model of leadership. But it doesn't matter because he did this monstrous thing in chapter 1 and it's going to come back. And he can do what he likes. He can't stop it. It's coming. And there is almost this kind of metaphysical truth that acts have consequences. Yeah. So he did something terrible and he commits himself to a long compensatory penitential path to try and deal with it. It really doesn't matter. The thing he did is going to come back, and it's just because you've committed an act in the universe and that has certain spin out consequences. So I think The Mayor of Casterbridge expresses a profound but metaphysical, if you want to call it, spiritual truth.
I don't think you need to meditate, Michael, because I think there are many, and that might be an unpopular opinion, there are many routes to the mountaintop, as we've spoken about before, and the mountaintop is that realization of many different things. I think if you can get there through writing or reading, that's a legitimate route, or dancing, or playing music, or painting. Religion is one, or meditation, or Buddhism, whatever. That's one way to the mountain. But why would we focus on the one way to the mountain when there's a million billion other ways? Every person who ever lived has their own way to the top of the mountain. 100%. So you don't need to meditate. Why don't you need to meditate? You do it through writing. You don't remember writing some of one small step, yet you touched other people's lives. That's it. That is it. But people ask, it's a famous question: what is Zen? That.
It's reassuring.
Yeah. Don't bother.
Even
or if you do want to bother, speak to one of us and we can give you.
Okay.
Right. Brilliant. So what we're trying to say is everything can be Zen if we allow it to be.
Sure. Yes. Yeah,
right. Michael, thank you for joining us, and thank you for listening today. Ed, is there anything else you would like to add? Michael, is there anything else you would like to add?
Just my thanks. Great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. And don't forget to comment, follow. If you have anything to say, we always like a good disagreement. Thank you. Bye-bye.